Tonight, the Grand Astoria Hotel was filled with the city's most important and wealthy people. They had all gathered for a charity auction, one that would raise money to help children who were in need. The hotel was grand, with sparkling chandeliers, elegant decorations, and many guests wearing their finest clothes. It was an event known for its luxury and for the big personalities of the people who attended. The auction items were one of a kind, and the bidding wars were expected to be fierce. Among the guests was Victor Hale, a successful businessman known for his wealth and big deals. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, and his loud, booming voice filled the room. Victor loved being the center of attention, so he made sure everyone knew about his latest business ventures, often dropping casual mentions of how much money he was making. He enjoyed the admiration he received from others. However, there was another guest in the room who stood out in a completely different way. Keanu Reeves entered through a side door. He wasn't dressed in a flashy tuxedo like most of the guests. Instead, he wore a simple dark suit with no tie. His style was understated, and his presence was calm and collected. Keanu didn't seek attention or try to impress anyone. He just walked into the room quietly, taking in the scene with calm, observant eyes. Victor noticed Keanu almost immediately. He leaned over to his companion, giving a little smirk. "Who invited him?" Victor asked, looking at Keanu with a hint of amusement. "Did someone forget to send the dress code?" He chuckled, clearly amused by Keanu's simple look. His companion looked at Keanu for a moment as though trying to place him. "He looks familiar," she said quietly. "Doesn't he?" Victor waved her off. "Nah, he's probably just some guy trying to rub shoulders with the big leagues. You know, trying to make a name for himself." Despite Victor's dismissive attitude, he decided to approach Keanu. He walked over with an air of superiority and greeted him with a polite but slightly condescending tone. "Good evening. Enjoying the view?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Keanu smiled politely and answered in a calm voice. "It's a beautiful event. The cause is inspiring." Victor raised an eyebrow, leaning in slightly, clearly intrigued by Keanu's calm demeanor. "Oh, absolutely," he said with a nod. "Nothing brings people together like a good charity, right?" He paused for effect, then added, "You know, they'll be auctioning some pretty serious items tonight. Hope you're ready. The bidding can get intense." Keanu remained calm, unfazed by Victor's attempt at intimidating him. Victor, thinking that Keanu was perhaps nervous or unsure of himself, patted him on the shoulder with a grin. "No offense, but this might not be your kind of scene. You see, this is where the big players come to play. Most people would feel small in a moment like this, but not you, right?" What Victor didn't realize was that Keanu didn't need anyone's approval. He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He was simply there for the charity, for the cause. He didn't need validation or the attention that Victor seemed to crave. As they spoke, the room grew quiet, and all attention shifted to the stage. Clara, the host of the auction, took the microphone and addressed the crowd. Her voice was warm and clear as she spoke to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the annual Astoria Children's Fund Charity Auction," she began. "Tonight, your generosity will help fund scholarships, medical care, and essential programs for children in need. Let's make this a night to remember." The audience clapped politely, but Keanu's focus was completely on Clara's words. He clapped softly, his eyes fixed on the stage as he listened carefully. On the other hand, Victor leaned toward his companion and muttered under his breath, "Same speech every year. Blah blah charity. Let's get to the good stuff already." The auction began with smaller items, things like a diamond necklace, a luxury vacation package, and a rare bottle of wine. Victor raised his paddle eagerly, bidding on the vacation package. $30,000, he declared loudly, his voice filled with excitement. The crowd clapped politely, and Victor looked around the room with a satisfied grin, scanning for any sign of challenge. He glanced at Keanu, almost daring him to bid. Keanu, however, just observed. His calm demeanor didn't change. As the night continued, the auction became more intense, and the items being sold were worth more and more. The stakes were raised with each passing item. The tension in the room grew as the next item was introduced, a vibrant painting by a renowned artist. The painting depicted the struggles and dreams of children worldwide. The starting bid for the artwork was announced as $50,000. Victor raised his paddle without hesitation. $50,000, he called out, his voice booming. The crowd murmured in approval, impressed by his boldness. Before the auctioneer could even say "going once," another voice interrupted. $75,000, Keanu said, his voice calm and steady. The entire room turned to look at him in surprise. Some guests gasped, others whispered to each other, clearly shocked that Keanu, who had been so quiet all evening, had jumped into the bidding with such a large sum. Victor's confident smile faltered, but he quickly recovered, raising his paddle again. $100,000, he called out sharply, his voice tinged with irritation. The crowd went silent, the tension thickening as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Would Keanu raise the stakes again? Keanu's calm expression never wavered. He leaned back in his chair, taking a sip of his water before raising his paddle once more. $125,000, he said, his voice as composed as before. The crowd gasped again. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Victor's face turned red, his arrogance beginning to crack under the pressure. Victor's friend whispered something in his ear, but he waved her off impatiently. $150,000, Victor bellowed, his voice now sharp and tense. He was beginning to feel the heat of the competition. His expression was tight, his patience wearing thin. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't hurry to bid. Instead, he took another sip of water, then raised his paddle again. $175,000, he said calmly. The audience was stunned. Whispers rippled through the room and many eyes turned to Victor, who now looked furious. Victor's face turned an even deeper shade of red as he threw a quick glance toward the stage, seeking reassurance from the auctioneer. $200,000, he snapped, his voice filled with a mix of defiance and desperation. The crowd murmured, some clapping lightly at the boldness of his bid. Keanu once again didn't rush. He stayed calm and composed, leaning back slightly in his chair. Then, without any sign of hesitation, he raised his paddle once more. $250,000, he said simply. This time, the gasps from the crowd were almost deafening. The auctioneer adjusted his glasses, a bit caught off guard. But he quickly confirmed the bid. $250,000. Do I hear $275,000? Victor froze. His mind raced as he processed the situation. His pride told him to continue to outbid Keanu, but something about Keanu's unshaken calm made him hesitate. Beads of sweat formed on his temple as he stared at Keanu, who appeared utterly unbothered. Victor's friend leaned in and whispered something, but Victor barely acknowledged her. He was too focused on the numbers in his head. Finally, after a long pause, he raised his paddle again. $300,000, he shouted, trying to take control of the situation. The room fell silent as everyone waited for Keanu to respond. The auctioneer turned to Keanu. $300,000, do I hear $325,000? Keanu didn't respond immediately. He sat still, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze fixed on the stage. The pause was agonizing. Everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath, waiting for Keanu's next move. Finally, Keanu lifted his paddle once more. $350,000, he said. The room erupted in shock. Victor's face turned a deep shade of red. His grip tightened on the edge of his chair, his jaw clenched. He could feel the tension in the air, and it was clear to everyone that his confidence had begun to crack. $350,000, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear $375,000? Victor's mind raced. His pride told him to keep bidding, but he felt something in the air that made him hesitate. Keanu's calm, almost amused expression made Victor feel like he was losing a battle he didn't fully understand. The room was completely silent as the auctioneer looked around the crowd. Everyone seemed to be watching Victor, waiting for him to make his move. Victor could feel the pressure mounting. His hand twitched, but he didn't raise his paddle. After what felt like an eternity, Victor sat back in his chair and lowered his paddle. The battle was over. $350,000 going once, going twice. The auctioneer paused for effect, his voice filled with excitement. Sold? The gavel came down with a loud thud. The crowd erupted in applause and all eyes turned to Keanu, who had just won the painting for $350,000. Keanu stood up and walked calmly to the stage. He handed over his payment information to the staff and Clara, the host, thanked him warmly. Thank you, she said, her voice full of gratitude. Keanu smiled politely and nodded before turning to leave the stage. As Keanu walked toward the exit, he passed by Victor's table. For a moment, he glanced at Victor, not with any sense of victory or triumph, but with a quiet, almost understanding look. Victor, on the other hand, sat still, his face expressionless as he watched Keanu leave. Victor's earlier bravado was gone. The auction had taught him something he wasn't expecting. It wasn't just about money, it was about humility and generosity, something Keanu had shown without even trying. Outside, Keanu stepped into his modest black car. The paparazzi were waiting outside, but Keanu just smiled politely and waved them off. He wasn't interested in making a statement. He simply wanted to leave and go home. Back inside, Clara noticed Victor sitting at the bar, deep in thought. She walked over to him and asked gently, "Are you okay?" Victor straightened up, putting on his usual smirk. But this time, it was clear that his confidence had been shaken. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Just thinking about how things turned out." Clara smiled softly, not judging him but offering a gentle bit of advice. "Sometimes it's important to reflect on what we've learned. We all have moments where things don't go the way we expect. But those moments can teach us a lot." Victor didn't answer right away, but for the first time he seemed to truly consider her words. She said after a moment, "Keanu didn't come here to compete with you or anyone else. He came because he believed in the cause." Victor laughed dryly. "Believed in the cause? He spent $350,000 like it was nothing. That's not belief, that's just showing off." Clara's face softened and she looked at him kindly. "You're wrong. It wasn't about how much money he gave. It was about what that money would do. Scholarships, health care, opportunities for kids who never had a chance. For him, it wasn't about showing off. It was about helping." Victor looked down at his glass, swirling the drink inside it. "I guess I didn't think about it that way," he said quietly. Clara smiled just a little. "It's never too late to start." She turned to leave but paused and looked back at him. "You know, generosity isn't just about money. It's about intention. Maybe ask yourself what yours was tonight." Her words hung in the air as she walked away, leaving Victor to think. For the first time in years he felt something inside him, a feeling he didn't often let himself feel: doubt. That night, Victor sat alone in his penthouse apartment. The city lights stretched out below him, twinkling like stars. His glass of bourbon sat on the table, forgotten, as he stared at his phone. Curiosity bubbled up inside him and he decided to look up Keanu Reeves. He was curious about the actor and his quiet life. As Victor read through articles, watched interviews and saw videos, he learned about how Keanu helped people without showing off. Despite being famous and rich, Keanu lived simply. The more Victor read, the more his view started to change. One story really caught his attention. It was a video interview where Keanu explained why he supported certain charities. "I believe," Keanu said in the video, his voice calm and steady, "if you have the ability to help someone, you should do it. Not because you want to be recognized, but because it's the right thing to do. It's not about the amount of money you give. It's about the impact you make." Victor paused the video and sat back in his chair. Keanu's words echoed in his mind. They blended with the words Clara had said. Victor felt a strange sensation, shame. It wasn't something he often felt, but now it was there. The next morning, Clara was at her desk in the charity office when she received an email. It was from Victor Hale. She clicked on it, curious. Victor had donated $500,000 to the charity. And he didn't ask for anything in return, no fame or attention. In his email, he wrote, "Thank you for reminding me what this is really about." Clara smiled as she read the message and closed the email. She was surprised but also touched. Across the city, Keanu was sitting in a small cafe. He sipped his coffee while reading a book. The painting he had bought from the auction hung in his living room. For Keanu, it wasn't about showing off. He didn't want people to talk about him or praise him. It was simply about doing the right thing and helping when he could. As Victor's donation began to make a difference, and Keanu continued his quiet, meaningful life, the story of that night at the auction became something more. It was a reminder of how humility, kindness, and self-reflection could change the world, and even change people themselves. A week had passed since the charity auction, but the effects of that night still spread. Keanu's painting was proudly displayed in his home. Every time he looked at it, he was reminded of the children who would benefit from the money. Meanwhile, Victor's life had changed. He couldn't stop thinking about the events of the auction. Keanu's calm confidence, Clara's pointed words, and the strange feeling of shame he had felt that night. Victor was someone who loved control, but now he felt shaken by the experience. Victor sat at his desk, looking out at the sprawling city below. His assistant knocked softly and came in. "Mr. Lancaster," she said, "the foundation sent this for you." She placed an envelope on his desk. "They also wanted me to let you know your donation has already been used." Victor nodded and waved her out. He was curious and opened the envelope. Inside was a thank you letter from the charity, signed by Clara herself. Along with it was a report showing how his money was being used. It would provide scholarships to students, medical supplies for a clinic, and meals for hundreds of children. Victor's eyes scanned the pages, looking at the numbers and facts. But his mind kept wandering back to the auction. He remembered the painting and how Keanu had quietly outbid him. He thought of how Keanu wasn't focused on winning but on helping. Victor smiled to himself. He had made the right choice that night. That weekend, Victor made a decision that was very unlike him. Instead of attending a fancy party with people who only cared about wealth, he decided to visit the pediatric clinic mentioned in the report. He dressed simply, wearing a jacket and slacks, and walked into the clinic. It was a small place but full of life. Nurses hurried from room to room, and the sound of children laughing filled the air. A staff member came up to him. She smiled warmly but was curious. "Can I help you, sir?" Victor hesitated. He wasn't used to feeling unsure. "I'm Victor Hale," he said, shaking her hand. "I donated to the Atoria Children's Fund, and I wanted to see how the money was being used." The woman's face lit up. "Mr. Lancaster, thank you so much. Let me show you around." As she led him through the clinic, Victor began to see the real results of his donation. He met a young boy who was getting treatment for a chronic illness. The boy's mother thanked Victor tearfully for making it possible for her son to get the care he needed. Victor saw a group of children playing in a colorful room, funded by the charity. Their laughter filled the air, and Victor felt something stir inside him. He sat quietly in the waiting room, watching the busy life around him. He thought of Keanu, wondering if Keanu had ever visited places like this. The thought made him smile. For the first time, he didn't feel that wealth and status were the most important things in life. Helping others felt far more meaningful. When he returned to his car, his assistant called. "Mr. Lancaster, your schedule is free for the afternoon. Should I schedule a meeting with the board?" Victor paused, looking back at the clinic. "No," he said softly, "I think I'll take the rest of the day off." Meanwhile, Clara sat at her desk in the charity office, reflecting on the changes she had seen since the auction. Victor's large donation had surprised her, but what surprised her even more was the sincerity in his follow-up email. She had seen many people donate for attention or self-promotion, but there was something different about Victor's actions. It reminded her of the quiet, purposeful way Keanu lived his life. Her phone buzzed with a message from the clinic director. "Victor Hale visited today. He was genuinely interested in the children's stories. I think your words made a difference." Clara smiled to herself. It gave her hope. Sometimes all it took was the right person or the right moment to help someone change. That evening, Keanu sat at a cafe reading a book. A young woman came up to him, holding a pen and a piece of paper. "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves," she said shyly. "I don't want to bother you, but I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done. I've seen stories about how much you help others, and it really means a lot to me." Keanu looked up and smiled warmly. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "But it's people like you who inspire me. Small acts of kindness really do make a difference." The woman smiled and nodded, then walked away with her paper, now signed. Keanu watched her go, thinking about how even a simple gesture like that could mean so much to someone. He thought about the auction, the painting, and the man who had been so determined to beat him. Keanu didn't hold grudges. It wasn't his nature. But he did wonder if Victor had learned something meaningful from that night. Back in his penthouse, Victor sat, staring at the lights outside his window. For the first time in years, he felt clear-headed. The wealth and power he had worked so hard to achieve seemed unimportant compared to the impact he could have on others. He silently promised himself to do more, not for praise but because it was the right thing to do. The events of the charity auction had changed Victor. It reminded everyone involved, Keanu, Clara, and Victor, of the power of humility, kindness, and reflection. It was another night of doing what he believed in. For Victor, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he could finally see beyond his ego and use his influence for good. Victor Hale's days of chasing recognition had begun to shift. The visit to the pediatric clinic had left a deeper impression on him than he cared to admit. The children's laughter, the gratitude of their families, and the realization that his wealth could really make a difference had stirred something inside him. But change doesn't happen right away. It's a process, and Victor was still learning. One evening, as Victor sat in his office, he stared at a blank notepad on his desk. His assistant had left a list of upcoming charity events, but none of them felt right. They were all big, fancy events meant more for showing off donations than really helping people. Victor leaned back in his chair, feeling frustrated. He thought about Keanu Reeves, a man who quietly outbid him without wanting any attention. Victor opened his laptop and read more about Keanu's charity work. Keanu supported children's hospitals, cancer research, and donated millions to organizations without anyone knowing. Keanu's work was always about the cause, not about the praise. Victor closed his laptop and sighed. It's not about the money, he said to himself. It's about doing it right. The next morning, Victor made a big decision. He called a meeting with his closest advisors and his assistant, Sophie. When they gathered in the conference room, Victor stood at the head of the table, looking serious. I want to start something new, he said. Something that really makes a difference. His advisors exchanged confused looks. One of them, a man named David, asked, Victor, you've always supported causes. What's different this time? Victor leaned forward, his hands on the table. What's different is the intention, he said. I don't want to just write checks and attend parties. I want to build something that fixes real problems. No middleman, no fluff. Real impact. Sophie, who had worked for Victor the longest, thought for a moment. What do you have in mind? Victor paused, thinking clearly about his vision. A foundation. One that focuses on education, healthcare, and opportunities for kids who don't have them. I want it to be transparent and personal. I want us to know the people we're helping. David seemed unsure. That's a big change, Victor. It'll take time, resources. And it's worth it, Victor interrupted firmly. I've spent years chasing the wrong things. It's time I did something meaningful. Within weeks, the groundwork for the Lancaster Impact Foundation was laid. Victor threw himself into the project with a focus his team had never seen before. He personally visited schools, community centers, and hospitals, talking to teachers, parents, and children to understand their needs. Every visit brought him closer to their struggles and made him more determined to help. At first, some of his peers mocked him. Victor Hale, the philanthropist, they would laugh at dinner parties. What's next, Victor? The saint? But Victor didn't care. He had learned that their approval didn't matter anymore. One afternoon, as Victor was overseeing renovations at a community center funded by his foundation, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Clara, who was hosting a charity auction. I heard about the Lancaster Impact Foundation. I'm impressed. Would you consider speaking at our next event about your journey? Victor thought about it. Public speaking wasn't his strength, especially when it came to something as personal as his transformation. But sharing what he had learned felt right. He typed a quick response. Count me in. The event was a month later, and Victor found himself backstage, nervously adjusting his tie. The ballroom was packed and the spotlight felt heavy. Clara approached, giving him a reassuring smile. You've got this, she said. Just speak from the heart. Victor nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the stage. The room went quiet as he walked up to the podium. Good evening, he said, his voice steady but humble. Many of you know me as a businessman, a man who has spent years chasing success and recognition. But tonight, I want to talk about something different. I want to talk about change. He paused, looking around at the audience. A few months ago, at this very event, I thought I had everything figured out. I thought charity was about writing checks and showing up. But I was wrong. Victor talked about the auction, his meeting with Keanu Reeves, and his visit to the pediatric clinic. He explained how he realized that his wealth could do more than just buy influence, it could change lives. Humility isn't something I knew much about, he said. But seeing someone like Keanu Reeves, someone who doesn't want applause or attention, made me question everything. It reminded me that true generosity comes from the heart, not from wanting to be seen. The audience listened closely, many of them nodding in agreement. I started the Lancaster Impact Foundation to do more than just donate. I wanted to connect with the people we're helping, to understand their struggles and work with them. And I want to encourage all of you to do the same. Because the truth is, it's not about how much you give. It's about why you give. When Victor finished speaking, the room burst into applause. For the first time, he felt a sense of fulfillment that no amount of wealth or status had ever given him. That night, as Victor mingled with the guests, he saw Keanu across the room, quietly sipping a glass of water. Victor gathered the courage to walk over. Mr. Reeves, he said, extending his hand. I don't think I ever thanked you. Keanu shook his hand, his face warm but curious. Thank me for what? For teaching me what generosity really means, Victor said. Keanu smiled, his humility shining through. I didn't teach you anything, he said. You figured it out on your own. Victor chuckled. Maybe, but you showed me the way. As the two men talked, Victor realized that the ripple effect of their encounter was huge. One man's humility had inspired another's transformation, starting a chain reaction of kindness that would help many people. In just a few months, the Lancaster Impact Foundation had made a real difference. It funded schools, clinics, and programs that helped children and families in need, giving them opportunities they never had before. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves kept quietly supporting causes, never seeking recognition. At one event, a child gave Keanu a drawing. Keanu smiled and accepted it with kindness, showing that his generosity came from the heart. Clara, speaking at a charity gala, summed it all up. When I look at what's been accomplished in such a short time, I'm reminded of one simple truth. Kindness is contagious. One act of generosity can inspire change far beyond what we see. As the crowd applauded, images of the clinic, the school, and other projects funded by the foundation appeared on the screen. Each one showed the power of one man's decision to embrace humility. Sitting together on a park bench, Victor and Keanu shared a quiet moment. Victor turned to Keanu and said, "You know, if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be doing this, I would have laughed in their face." Keanu smiled gently. "Life has a funny way of surprising us sometimes," he said. "It just takes the right moment to see what really matters." Victor nodded, his voice softer now. "And the right person to remind us." They shared a quiet laugh, knowing that their connection wasn't based on wealth or fame, but on a shared purpose, to make the world a little better. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next video.